Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. A warm welcome to everyone joining us for this webinar, Policy Communication in Social Platforms, provided to you by the EU Bubble Insider. As we gather here from different parts of the EU, from the EU Bubble, please feel free to participate in the discussion. There is a Q&A section following the discussion. We will be watching your comments and your questions on LinkedIn, Twitter, and on YouTube. I'm delighted to be able to introduce to you our panel of great industry experts, of panelists who work with the topic we discuss here today on daily basis. So allow me to introduce our panel today. First, we have Maria Linkova-Neis, who is the Communications Director at CEFIC. Maria is actually one of my top people to follow on a lot of content that she shares about best practices for policy communications. Maria, welcome.
Thank you very much, Christoph.
And we also have Roisin Traynor, who is the Senior Account Director at BCW Brussels. Roisin was actually part of the team behind the recent EU Media Pool report by BCW. She works in the digital communications team at BCW Brussels. Roisin, welcome to the panel.
Thanks, Christoph. Happy to be here.
And last but definitely not least, we have Jacques Foul, digital strategist and trainer, who is also a very active person on LinkedIn, sharing his experience and advice mainly on thought leadership on LinkedIn and on building strategies for organizations in the EU Bubble. Jacques, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Pleasure to be here, Christoph. Excited to get this started.
Absolutely. And as we kick off, I would like to give each of our panelists the opportunity to provide a brief introduction to their initial thoughts on the topic of our today's webinar, which is the current risks, but also challenges and opportunities within the scope of policy communications in social platforms. So without further ado, I would like to ask Roisin Traynor to begin. Roisin, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Christoph, and thanks for having me on this panel and with such great guests that you mentioned you go to yourself for inspiration about this topic, and I can definitely say that about me. I really go online for wisdom and inspiration from the panelists you've invited here today. So today we are here to talk about the future of EU policy comms on social media. But before we actually look to the future, I'd actually like to go back to the past. 15 years ago, I remember working in an EU institutional office in Ireland. It was the time of the Lisbon Treaty referendum. And I recall a meeting where we were discussing media monitoring, and someone just asked the question, should we track what was being said about the Lisbon Treaty on this new website called Facebook? They considered it a good idea to take into account, but the monitoring reports remained focused on just print media. I mean, physical papers, opening them up, cutting out clippings and everything like that. At the time, I was also volunteering at a nonprofit, and I was excited to use Facebook as a free tool to reach supporters. Definitely not a free tool anymore. But then if we skip forward 1 year, I found myself in Belgium, and I was on the comms team of a nonprofit working on deadly conflict issues. And my excitement for Facebook was then eclipsed again by a newer tool, Twitter, especially when I saw the power that it held during the Arab Spring uprisings in 2010. Now, if we fast forward to the present, we've seen so many social media platforms since then. And nowadays, trends are happening more frequently, but they're also fading faster. Remember Clubhouse or Vine? I remember even having a Foursquare strategy. And yet the two major platforms still persist for EU policy communications. And I think it's important that we take this into account when we look at any social media strategy today. There is no denying that the excitement and innocence of the early days of social have been replaced by chaos at Twitter, now X, the prevalence of disinformation, online harassment, talks of bans or companies pulling out of the EU, even Meta not launching threads in the EU. It's really a hectic and complicated social media world. But here in Brussels, we still don't see any of the competitors taking off. Okay, Thierry Breton is, actively trying to maybe change that by posting actively on Blue Sky. And yes, there are definitely niche platforms. We've got Substack, Mastodon, to name a few, but these don't yet have a stronghold in Brussels. One exception to this, I could say, is LinkedIn. A Bloomberg article recently announced that LinkedIn is apparently now cool and showed how LinkedIn is benefiting from all these upheavals in the social media world. And that brings me on to, as you mentioned, Christoph, BCW's recent EU media poll carried out with market research firm Savanta. That also pointed to the popularity of LinkedIn in Brussels, which saw a 3% rise in popularity amongst EU decision makers, while Twitter actually experienced a 5% decline, making LinkedIn the most popular social media platform after messaging app WhatsApp. Now, the foundation of any good comm strategy is to go where your audience is. And right now, for social media in Brussels, for policy communications, that's still Twitter and increasingly LinkedIn. But I would add that regardless of what platform you use, we really need to focus on building an integrated approach where a solid policy comm strategy is one part of a wider public affairs strategy. We're seeing a lot of promising trends in this area. There's the rise and expanding role of policy comms as a profession in Brussels, covering everything from media relations to marketing campaigns. There's the increase in support for employee and executive comms, and the growing awareness that companies and organizations and individuals in those companies targeting policymakers need to tell their story in an emotive and a straightforward way. And these things apply no matter what platform you're using.
I really appreciate the perspective of looking at history to learn from the past. Now, I would like to give the floor to Maria Linkova-Nys, Communications Director at Cefic. Maria, the floor is yours.
Right, thanks, Christoph, and good morning, everybody. So three things that I wanted to emphasize in my opening remarks today are the following. So first, indeed, and this is, I think, what Roisin also indicated, there is now there is a lot of talk, there are a lot of conversations about where shall we move to? Should we now be on X? Is it now time to move from Meta somewhere else? Does everybody now need to be on LinkedIn? And what about Mastodon? So all these conversations just keep on, happening. And there is this feeling of FOMO, right? If you're not on that platform, on one of those emerging platforms right now, for some reason, you'll miss out on huge benefits. I think this fear is a little bit misplaced. First of all, you indeed need to understand and have a very sober assessment whether your audience is really moving to that new emerging platform and moving in sufficient quantities for you to justify investments into the presence on a new platform. Because it's not just about being on a new network, creating an account. You have to create a consistent stream of content, optimized for that particular channel, optimized for the needs and wants of the audience on that particular network, so that the algorithm could prioritize your content as well and put it in everybody's feed. So it's a full-time job, and let's be very frank here. I'm sure probably most of the people online, we work for rather small organizations or small teams here in Brussels. We do not have the manpower of big publishing houses to invest into high quality, consistent stream of content across multiple social media networks. So for me, this is also very much a question of resources. And it may be, let's say, more beneficial and more prudent to focus on only, selected few, rather than try to scatter your efforts across multiple networks and try to be on every emerging platform, unless, of course, you have the resources to do so. So that's the one thing. Just don't, let those rash decisions to influence your long-term strategy. And then the second thing I wanted to emphasize is when we look at the Reuters digital news report, and I highly recommend everybody who is online to read this report. There are a lot of interesting findings there. And one of the findings is that the important role of influencers, celebrities, and social media personalities is on the rise. So it's not, of course, an entirely new trend, but the findings confirm that the role of influencers is nowhere near of declining. So in particular, especially when people want to find out more about current affairs, about news, politics, and policy, an increasing number of people go to social media and they listen to those influencers rather than, let's say, consult official channels of official organizations, institutions, or even traditional journalists or traditional media outlets. And that's particularly striking, of course, within the younger demographic. So I think it's 20% of people aged between 18 and 24. They actually only use TikTok to learn more about current affairs, politics and policy. So that's number two. So what does it mean for us policy communicators in Brussels or elsewhere? That we also have to somehow tap into this potential of creating more credible and authentic content using either working together with influencers or even nurturing our own, social media ambassadors from within our organization to be able to effectively advocate on social media as well, because it's pure human psychology that you can only win, hearts and minds, or it's a better way to win hearts and minds if you invest into this peer-to-peer communication, because these people have more credibility in the eyes of your audience. This is also maybe why also LinkedIn is now growing in its prominence as well. So that's something that I think that's the third point that I wanted to make. It's obviously not an easy task, but thinking about how you could either work together with influencers, or let's say grow your own influencers, your ambassadors of your cause in your organization. That's something that will pay off, I think, in the long-term perspective.
Maria, you highlighted a quite critical issue here, which is the matching of your plans and aspirations as communicators with resources that are available. And I'm sure we'll get to discuss that also a bit more in the next minutes. But now I would like to give the voice to Jacques Foul. Jacques, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here. Just to start, I just want to say that I'm personally a recovering lobbyist. So I used to work in lobbying for a number of years, developing digital campaigns for trade associations, big groups. And one of the challenges that I've seen in those conversations that I had with my clients was that sometimes there was just a lack of strategy. And strategy was sort of a big challenge for them, because they were trying to make sense of all the different platforms and all the different activities that a communication team could basically be responsible for. And I think this notion of strategy is becoming even more important these days, with everything that's happening with X, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and any other platform that we can think of. And we also have the arrival of alternative platforms like Mastodon and Blue Sky. And I think this is just a moment for us to rethink the way we do communications. It's a great invitation for everyone in the European bubble to think about their strategy, the audiences, the messages they have. And throughout my career, I've always had this mission of improving the way we communicate in the EU bubble, and doing that through training and doing that through different courses and helping people just finding ways to better communicate. And I think now with everything that's happening with all these different platforms, I think the goal is to really get back to a sense of strategy and understand where we can go from there.
Thank you very much. You've given us quite something to think about. All of you have shared your thoughts, which show space that it is not easy for communicators, because there is always the aspiration to do more, to get better results. But then today I would like us to explore the possible reasonable approaches to approach communication strategies on social media with exactly what Maria has mentioned in mind, the balance between resources, possibilities, and also the fact that transitioning, migrating audiences from one social media platform to another is not such an easy thing. I would like to start with, because obviously the platform that you mentioned the most is LinkedIn and Twitter, and these are the most exciting places to be right now, because everyone is talking about them. Everyone is talking about LinkedIn, how many opportunities there are, and everybody is talking about Twitter, how problematic it is. But there are other platforms. For example, there is the good old Facebook, which still has its role to play. Then there is obviously TikTok that was also mentioned, but it's a platform that is not available for lawmakers, for people working in the Commission, the Council, the Parliament, as it has been banned on official phones. So I would like to ask each of you on your thoughts about if you would consider platforms as Facebook or TikTok as relevant in your strategies that you recommend to your clients, or strategies that you consider for your own activities in the coming months, in the coming year. Maybe we could start with Roisin.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, look, okay, we have to think of Facebook, the original massive social media platform. And I think the latest I saw was more than 3 billion active monthly users on Facebook. So there's still a lot of people there. I would say, in terms of using it within the space of policy comms, we always talk about quality over quantity. And I think if you are trying to target your communications, your marketing to a large audience, then Facebook is more appropriate. But for policy comms, I think it's more niche. And that's why actually LinkedIn does so well, because not only do you have your niche audience, but you also have a very engaged audience as well in the area that you're looking to reach. I think with TikTok, it definitely cannot be ignored at all. And despite the bans, you've still got, for example, for the 2024 elections, I saw a lot of parliamentary groups are hiring TikTok managers. I saw one for the Green Party there the other day. You've got EPP Group, which has, I think, almost 60,000 followers on TikTok. despite the ban. Here, we're all sitting here in Belgium. They have Belgian politicians, especially, and I'm going to, I don't think I'll do very well with the name, but you have the PvdA leader who is hugely active on TikTok. You've also got people like Conor Rousseau from Vooruit. So it's interesting to see that despite the bans, these are still being used. So I think it's definitely something I would say. That's why you hire a social media manager. That's why you hire someone who works in policy comms, because they are able to advise you on what best tool to use. They should be the ones who are monitoring these in the background, seeing how they're being used and being ready for that first moment to pounce, to jump in. But not at all to jump in at the first, with every single tool. They have to use their expertise in the background, I think, to analyze that and then jump in when it's ready. And like I said, I don't think it's ready yet, but definitely still be monitoring, keeping an eye on it, and seeing and be ready to use it when the time is right and when your audience is there. So,
Maria, what would you add?
If I could add to that, I think, well, TikTok is definitely not dead. I mean, that's for sure. And actually, if you look at this very useful research of yours, Roisin, the BCW, actually the growth of TikTok is similar to the growth of LinkedIn. And I mean, and that is also considering the fact that indeed this platform has been banned on all official smartphones of people working in institutions. So imagine what the growth would have looked like if there was no ban. And definitely for things, anyone involved in political campaigning, any organization, maybe the grassroots organization that needs to reach out to younger demographic, which is increasingly present on TikTok and to a less extent on Facebook, that remains a go-to channel. And I don't think that this ban will have any significant impact, because the chances of really missing on this huge chunk of audience and potential voters ahead of the elections, I mean, the risk is too big to take, I think, for a lot of political groups. That said, I mean, I think whenever we talk about all those platforms, whether it's Facebook or TikTok or even LinkedIn, I think next to thinking about the audience, we also have to think about whether we, I mean, as organizations, have capacity to develop the content that really works for those social media platforms, because it's no longer sufficient. I mean, you cannot just copy paste or slightly edit the same message that you would post on X and on LinkedIn and post the same thing on TikTok or Facebook. It just doesn't work this way. I mean, you can do that, but this is useless. You have to, and especially for TikTok and Facebook, you have to create lighter content, fun content, maybe use satire, so a completely different tone of voice, let alone, of course, different formats, videos, if you're really serious about growing your followership on those social media networks. And I think that's really that's probably the most difficult thing for a lot of definitely lobbyists and corporate groups. Maybe it's less of a problem for NGOs to have this lighter tone of voice, and to be able to create a more even controversial content, because that's the type of content that works across social media platforms, and even on LinkedIn. I mean, I'll give you a very very funny example. So we in CEFIC, so we're definitely very serious trade association, but from time to time, on occasions, we also, and I have a great colleague of mine who does all of this, we create lighter posts on LinkedIn. For example, a week ago during Halloween, we posted a picture of a chemist with a pumpkin head, and there was a light message about potions and Halloween. And this kind of posts, they, believe me or not, even on a platform like LinkedIn, they generate most engagement, more visibility, and result in more followership than any policy-related serious message that we post. So I think that's something that we'll have to keep in mind. So people crave entertainment, and you have to be able to deliver this entertainment regardless of where you are, obviously. And that's the most difficult job to do is to find this tone of voice that could be slightly, funny, witty, but not, of course, offensive or not too sarcastic. That would work across all those social media platforms.
So maybe the right approach here is to differentiate which platform you're actually active on with those which you see as inspirations, because TikTok is banned, may not be the first place of choice to be, but still, because of its growth, because of its the things you can learn there and how it engages audiences, maybe there is something to learn from that platform that can be implemented on other platforms. And I would really like to hear Jacques' thoughts on this.
Yeah, first of all, I completely agree with Maria when it comes to tone of voice, when it comes to sort of picking the right platforms, because you don't want to basically divide your attention for so many different platforms. I think you really have to focus on the ones that are the most impactful for you and your organization. I think for me, TikTok has been one of the most influential platforms in the recent years for many reasons. It repopularized short videos. It's also a platform that's really influential because other platforms have started to use the same techniques or sort of the same sort of style of videos, like Instagram. And also in terms of organic growth, it's one of the platforms that has the most potential. So if you're just starting off, or if you're starting a new platform or new page, if I may say, your potential of reaching so many people is really more important on TikTok rather than other platforms that are basically dying, like X, unfortunately. So I think TikTok is really, really big, and it can continue to grow in the EU space despite the bans. Facebook has been struggling a little bit when it comes to privacy concerns and advertising, and just an older generation is also on there. So I think Facebook is not vital, but I think it's still important for a lot of organizations in Brussels. I think it has some capabilities that other platforms don't have, like Facebook groups, for example, and without forgetting, obviously, the ads platform, which is probably the most performing ad platform out there. So I wouldn't really forget about Facebook. Obviously, LinkedIn for me is the number one. And as we've seen with the study from BCW and Savanta, Facebook is basically growing as a place of influence, as a place of attention. So if you're in EU communications, policy communications, you have to be on LinkedIn. And what else? I mean, obviously we have alternative platforms like Mastodon and Blue Sky, which have their own ways of working. So either on servers or invitations. So the way you join these communities is different than any other platform. And it's usually more private conversations and, deeper conversations as well. So I think with everything in mind, we really have to go down to strategy. And as Maria said, we have to focus on the things that actually work for us, have sort of a minimalistic approach to how we do things and not try to, basically shoot at every possible opportunity. And also, the tone of voice. I think a big part of what we've seen, there's been a recent study from a group that studied the European Commission and press releases from the European Commission since the 80s. And we see that everything that we see from the EU bubble is unreadable. It's difficult to read. It's difficult to understand. It's very politicized. So I think thinking about your tone of voice is really interesting and really has to stand out when you communicate online.
But is Twitter really dying? Because definitely there is stuff happening with Twitter. People are leaving. Organizations are closing their accounts. But it's still a platform with lots of quite important stakeholders that you can address. There is a number of important influencers from the EU bubble still very active on Twitter or X. If it's really dying, then when should someone, when is the point someone should say, okay, it's enough, we're leaving, I'm leaving? Who'd like to pick up?
I can chime in quickly there. I think, like you said, okay, it does seem like it's dying when you look at it today, but it's definitely not dead yet. And I think you should never leave a platform until it really is fully dead. I think if you look at it now in terms of, for example, one good example to take would be Twitter ads. If you have a look at the quality and the type of advertisers now on Twitter, you'll notice a massive difference. The big brand names the really professional ads seem to have dropped out, and you get a lot more of these tiny little very unprofessional ads that are popping up all over the place. And I would tell clients to kind of use caution when doing Twitter ads, because you don't know where it's going to appear beside. If it's going to appear beside a verified account that has that is sharing mis or disinformation, you really need to be careful about that. But I think if you still see engagement on the platform, then you'd be a fool to leave it. So I think as long as that engagement, you're still getting it, stay on the platform. But if you start to notice that starting to disappear, then maybe it's time to leave.
Maria, what would you say? When is the good time to leave Twitter?
Well, I'm following, BCW's research, the, evidence-based policy making. The research says Twitter is still one of the key, let's say, sources of information. And as you rightly said, most of the influencers and politicians are still there. We also see from, our account, indeed, the metrics, we don't see the same level of engagement as in the past, but it's still there. And at the end of the day, you also have to ask yourself this question, okay, is it just about quantity or is it about quality? Okay, even maybe the numbers are lower for engagement on Twitter, but it does not necessarily mean that you're not reaching the people that are really important for you, because especially I think in policy comms in Brussels, it's sometimes just 10-20 people that really matter for your issue, and you're not really you don't necessarily want to influence millions. So is it really that important for you that, I don't know, half of advertisers from the US left X? So that this is why I think it's better not to kind of get into this panic mode, and just because everybody's talking about leaving X and going somewhere else, that you should necessarily do this. I just think have a more sober assessment of where your audience is, and there is indeed absolutely no need. I mean, there is no penalty, right, for staying on Twitter, unless Racine tells me otherwise. So yeah, that's what I think about that.
And I think if it really is so, then maybe with so many shifts within the platform, there are new opportunities. If the platform is becoming less crowded, you can maybe make your voice better heard. And here, I would like to go back to the platforms that were already mentioned, the smaller new comers to this competition, platforms. Just to name the examples, Mastodon or Blue Sky, but there are more. I remember, since I've been engaged in working in digital communications, there was always this best practice to explore new platforms before they become expensive, before they become crowded, because this is the opportunity. This is the opportunity to get better reach for less. And not only in terms of ads, but in terms of the algorithm and everything else. And building on what you said, Maria, that communication in the EU bubble is addressing smaller groups of people. Sometimes it's the right 5 or 10 people you want to address. Maybe we are in this very specific industry where it actually really makes sense to enter smaller platforms, like Mastodon, for example.
The question to me.
I was waiting and to see who would like to take
I was
this
the first
question,
to take the bait.
please.
Well, as I said at the beginning, I think it's all a matter of resources. If you really have, manpower to establish a strong presence on one of those emerging networks, you really have capacity to explore best practices, because indeed there are no, at least to my knowledge, no best practices of engaging on Mastodon, on Blue Sky, or other platforms. So if you have that capacity, of course, by all means, you should not constrain yourself with just to other platforms. But as I said, I think most of the organizations that I know of in Brussels definitely have a resource problem, especially when it comes to content creation for social media. And this is why I think it's not really a realistic strategy for many of us.
Jacques, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I think the resource issue is really the number one thing. It's also something that I've seen. People usually struggle in the bubble with strategy, visibility, or capability or capacity. And we all want visibility. We want to build sort of campaigns and build audiences, and we want to find the best way to do it at the minimum cost. But I think, to be honest and to be transparent about this, I think those new platforms are really interesting because they allow a different way of sharing information. They're very, they're very good for deep conversations. So that's perfect for, the policy space. But at the same time, I think we have to be realistic with what's feasible. And platforms like maybe LinkedIn might be more suited for organizations that still want to have these deep conversations without sort of, having to cater to like smaller audiences in these smaller alternative platforms. I think they should still invest some time into keeping an eye on what is going on these platforms and finding their own audiences there. But if your audience is not on that platform, then I wouldn't encourage you to basically invest more time in it. The same way goes for TikTok or Facebook.
In some of the discussions, I saw this thought that it's possible to actually transfer audiences. I've been working with many digital communication campaigns and strategies myself, and to be honest, I have never seen a successful strategy of transferring one audience from, let's say, Twitter successfully to LinkedIn. It's always even if you're dealing with the same people, the same audience, it's always a different way how people use each platform, and it just doesn't work as easy as one would expect. So is this something that organizations should consider? For example, if someone has been very active on Twitter, and Twitter X has been their main platform for a long time, and now they're hearing, okay, Twitter is dying, and what should we do? We have a LinkedIn page, but we're not active. So my question here is, and maybe we could start with Jacques again on this. Is there any best practice, good way that can be applied if you want to move your audience to a new platform, let's say from Twitter to LinkedIn?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've never actually heard the concept of migrating audiences. So if we find a solution for that, then I would be happy to investigate. But yeah, I think it's a tricky situation. I think the real question is, can we make use of all the time and resources that we've put into Twitter to another platform? And I think it's not physically possible. I think this also reminds us how can I put this? it reminds us the power of email, because that's what you can do with emails, right? If you have a newsletter and you can basically switch your audience from, you know, a newsletter to another, obviously, you know, following GDPR rules and everything. But I think it's a little bit more tricky on social media. You have different audiences in different platforms using the tools differently. So it's very difficult to basically cross promote, you know, your message from one platform to another. I think, as we said again, I think it's just about investing more time in the platforms you think are performing and the platforms that make sense for your audience. But at the end of the day, I don't think it's possible to migrate in a safe, clean, and frictionless way, basically.
Roshin, what's the BCW way to do it?
Really, exactly what Jacques just said. I really don't think it's possible to completely take an audience from one and place it into the other, because the audiences of these tools are completely, I think, are very different, and the type of content you post and the tone of voice you use for each platform is different. Although, like Maria said, if the humor posts are also starting to work on LinkedIn as well, then that's I think I find that very interesting direction to go as well, to take into account. But I think, you know, at the same time, what we also have to see, and I think Jacques referred to this earlier as well, is that the platforms are all starting to learn from TikTok. So they are actually starting to become more similar than they used to be. And I think that really comes down to the TikTok algorithm, that they all wish that they had an algorithm as strong as TikTok. And you see it now, if you're on Instagram Reels, if you're on YouTube Shorts, they really suck you in, and you're scrolling for 20 minutes, half an hour. You haven't even noticed a second gone past. And that's all based on from TikTok. So the platforms are becoming more similar, which means you can start to create content that's quite similar across these platforms. Now, I never would have said this a few years ago, but with this shift, because of TikTok's impact, I think it has actually become more realistic to create similar content for the same platform. And I think what you'll also notice about those and about the growing platforms is, of course, video. And it sounds a bit, okay, this was years ago as well. We were also talking video. But I think it is so relevant. And you also see it a lot now as well, of course, on LinkedIn and the thought leadership. You can't just do a post. You have to have your little video of yourself doing the thought leadership positioning in a video as well. So I think you can see them becoming a bit more similar, but I still would say you still have to take it into account, the different audiences for different platforms, and you definitely can't see it just as a switching one to the other very too easily.
So if LinkedIn is the most interesting place to look at right now, and actually commenting on the BCW reports, Sebastian Tarnowski on Twitter asked the question, is LinkedIn the game changer in 2024 in the EU bubble? If it is, we'll probably see. What is the most important thing to know about LinkedIn for those who are considering their strategies, their approach? Is it regularity? Is it personal branding of team members in the organizations? Maria, if we could start with you and your experience as a very active personality, sharing your own content, but also sharing content on behalf of your organization.
Yeah, and so if I can maybe first pour some cold water on LinkedIn, because I think we're, of course, very excited about this, new thing in the Brussels bubble. But let's also be mindful about the limitations of LinkedIn, because it has not been designed as a, let's say, a policy community platform. It's very much, of course, business driven, and that has an impact, of course, on the way the platform works. For example, also, even if you take the ad targeting options, so it's slightly different to, of course, other platforms. If you want to run ads on LinkedIn, you are very much, more constrained in your, let's say, categories and targeting options compared to other platforms. And again, it's also a very at least from our also own internal research, because we've been looking into LinkedIn as well, it looks like it's a very also demographically not very inclusive category. It's mainly, of course, business people that are present here. So it all depends on, if that's the right people that you want to target. If they're there, then you should definitely increase presence on LinkedIn. But if you're trying to reach a completely different audience, for example, you're an NGO and you want to target young people, so maybe that's also not the right place for you. But when it comes to LinkedIn, I think and there are, I think, multiple tutorials on LinkedIn itself on how to, beat algorithm and all of that. So personal, growing a personal brand, that's the go-to strategy for LinkedIn. So just posting content regularly, and ensuring that you generate enough engagement. That's the only winning strategy now on LinkedIn. Now I see more often also paid, sponsored posts more often, also thought leadership sponsored posts from CEOs from various companies. But I'm curious also to see, to hear from other participants whether they think this is a winning strategy, for example, to promote your CEO, Secretary General. I think it's fairly new, so I'm curious to find out. But considering that, again, here in Brussels, where it's not that much about the reach, but about, let's say, the quality of people that are your networks. So probably this organic growth and just investing into your personal brand is the best way to go.
Jacques, what are your thoughts on this?
Very good points. I kind of wanted to say the same things. I think that what's really important on LinkedIn is value. That's the number one thing that we all want to do, and we all want to create this for our customers, clients, audiences. I think value, consistency, and maybe a little bit of creativity is what sort of makes people stand out on LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is great for building connections, especially professional ones, or mostly professional ones. And it's something that I use every day to sort of share my thoughts and create content and connect with people. So I think it's really key for the EU comms people to understand that this is probably the platform that has the most potential for all these reasons. Mostly professional content is on there. The algorithm doesn't really like or doesn't favor more personal content. And yeah, this notion of value is really key. I think a lot of organizations, if they're really thinking about their audiences and thinking about providing value and support and educating people and coming up with ideas and solutions, this is what LinkedIn is going to basically favor in terms of what we see in the newsfeed. So yeah, value is the number one thing for me.
Roshin, would you like to add something to this?
I would just say, I don't know, if you ever switch your LinkedIn feed to most relevant or most recent, and if you do that switch immediately, if you switch to most relevant, it's basically like a training guide in how to write a LinkedIn post that gets more engagement, because you can see the type of posts completely change, and you can also tend to see the same type of people as well. If I change to most relevant in my network anyway, I see people who tend to write really good, solid, valuable posts. Like I will get, if I say most relevant, I will actually get more posts from the likes of Jacques and Maria, who are actually giving me something that LinkedIn knows that I can benefit from, and that, it's not clickbaiting. It's actually giving me something of value. And you can see that's very evident if you do that switch. So I think I would advise people maybe to do that sometime, just to see the difference. And it kind of shows you then what not to do as well on LinkedIn. So
I have asked many questions, but I would like to also give the opportunity to our audience to give their questions to our panelists. It's still a good moment, a good time to post your question, whether on LinkedIn or Twitter or YouTube. If you have questions or comments, please share them with us now, so we can so our panelists can share their thoughts, their opinions, and actually building on what you just said, Roisin. There is one comment from H2020 PathoCert project, which asks a quite interesting question about the replacement of Twitter as a tool providing, as a social media platform providing such a live and immediate communication, especially for breaking news. Thinking about this, my only thought, what could be the replacement, and we will probably see how that develops in the coming months, that would be Threads from Meta, if it goes live. But I'll let you guys maybe answer. Who would like to take this question?
Yeah, I can start. I think Threads would be the natural replacement. Obviously, I don't really like to say replacement because everything is sort of up in the air. We don't really know what's going to happen. I think just in the way you use Threads, it's probably similar to what you do on Twitter. So that's where I see the sort of similarity. But at the same time, I think if it's coming for live conversations, I'm trying to think, but I don't think there's any other sort of platform apart from basically just news alerts and possibly some conversations on LinkedIn. If you're following hashtags, for example, this can give you sort of an update of what is going on. But yeah, apart from that, I think Threads is probably the normal Twitter replacement.
And I think that's also, it comes from the discussion we already had before, that it's hard to see any of the platforms that are now popular, like LinkedIn or Facebook, to see as something that can replace or can be seen as something where the strategy of activity can be transferred from Twitter, X. Maria?
Yeah, well, I think the question already contains an answer, because the functionality of Twitter is so good, right? But this is why it's become so popular, that I think whatever network, a new platform, if it ever arrives to replace it, will probably be very similar to the format that Twitter has at the moment, just because it's been so useful also for not just for policy communication, but I think there's quite a significant body of research which confirmed also a key role of Twitter, for example, in crisis management, in disaster communication. It's been really impactful in that sense, because it enables to deliver real-time alerts to a lot of people that actually saved lives. So I think it's also important to keep that dimension in mind. So we need something like Twitter. Maybe it's going to be called something else, but the idea, the design is really working and is delivering.
Roisin, would you like to add something?
Yeah, completely agree. And I would say, the latest I heard was maybe March. People are saying, rumored for Threads to launch, and you can already see it. And actually, with the Israel-Palestinian conflict, now you can see these different tools and how they're being used in such a live news conflict situation. And Threads has just completely expanded its use of by journalists and news media around this conflict. And you can see that completely changing. And also, not only that, but Instagram is actually a place people are going now for the news about this conflict. And someone mentioned earlier as well, TikTok is where people are also getting their news now. Younger generations, true, but it's still where people are going now instead, because they have lost that, maybe because some journalists have left the Twitter platform. I think, though, one thing for Threads, of course, is they will have to get hashtags because you can't search as easily. So that's going to be a big thing. But I think it's definitely something to keep in mind, that we are kind of seeing this change and people trying to get their news in other places. But at the moment, yeah, again, like it seems to be the theme of the last hour. Twitter still has it, but there's definitely change afoot. So.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. Here's another very interesting and also timely question, both in general terms, but also, as we are approaching the EU elections, in the context of massive misinformation. Do you have integrated disinformation management in your strategy? Do you have a guideline for every single platform? I think, Maria, you're the best here to answer that.
Well, I'm not sure about that, because my organization, we're not a political organization, so we are not, let's say, very well come in contact with some misinformation, disinformation very often. And what I think for any, let's say, definitely corporate policy communicator, there are several always, let's say, layers of approval and validation that you need to seek if you want to post about something or share someone else's content, and so it's, I think, rather unlikely that somebody would, especially, I mean, at least from corporate accounts, I don't think there is a big risk of sharing something that could be considered as disinformation, if, of course, the right processes are in place. But yeah, there is, I think, and I'll be also happy to hear other people's views. There are now a lot of AI tools that actually allow you to detect disinformation on social media platforms, and I think it's going to be quite interesting to watch how these things are going to work during elections, because of course that will lead to probably proliferation of misinformation. But on the other hand, also the rise of all those tools that allow us now better to capture the original source of data or images and identify whether they are real or fake.
Roisin, what's your take on this?
I would say what applies is what applied 10 years ago even as well, is you have to rely on reputable sources no matter what platform you're using. And I think this is even, you have to double down on that now, especially because, of course, we know verified users is like anyone can just pay $8.99 a month and be verified. So it has become even more of a struggle. So I think you have to be more aware of that and really stick to those reputable sources that are known. And I think as well, one way of doing this is, for example, and now I'm just talking about the Twitter platform for your misinformation management strategy, is when you know that you can follow a reputable list, and you know that list is where you will get your valid sources, then I think that's definitely something to do. And the other thing I would say is, don't feed into it. You see sometimes people, if they're retweeting, even if they quote tweet some disinformation by saying this is not true or something, don't fall for that. And that's why you see a lot of people just sharing the screenshot or so. But even that, I would say, is to try and avoid this. And I know, working in an organization dealing with deadly conflict situations, we came across these things all the time. And the idea was also to figure out where's the source, where's it coming from, and stop it at the source, and really to not engage with the trolls or the people pushing the misinformation or disinformation. So.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the question, and thank you for the answers. And before we finish, because it's slowly time to wrap up our meeting today, I have one last question that from Helen Willets that I would like to give the floor to Jacques. What is the?
Wow, that's a deep question. I don't think we'll have enough time to answer it. But yeah, if to answer this question, so how to translate policy lingo into something digestible without writing it for them. I honestly, writing courses is great without having to translate it for them. I think writing is something that we use every single day. We are writing emails, we're sending Teams messages, and I think writing courses are great for that because it just helps you improve your writing and cut the fluff. Providing examples of good writing is also something that's good. Reading the news also helps because journalists usually know how to write. They're writing in sequences. They have the inverted pyramid technique. So there's a lot of things that can be done by simply upskilling your team with writing and reading good writing, basically.
Maria, would you like to add something here?
Well, only that I think the first and foremost, and I mean, there are obviously a lot of tutorials and books on how to write. I mean, that person should be really interested in improving his or her skills. So getting that person's buy-in to actually transform his writing into something more palatable, I think it's paramount, because without it, you can, of course, give as many trainings as you can, but it's not going to work.
And the last voice I would like to give to Roisin here. Maybe you would like to share your perspective on this.
Yeah, I'm also a big fan of training, but like Maria said, you can. There's only so much training, and again, I think that's where the policy comms experts come into it, because I feel like sometimes I refer to this role as being a translator, and we're basically a translator from the policy lingo to the kind of normal, understandable, everyday, more approachable language. So I think you might, unfortunately for some people, you might always need to be, for them to have a policy comms expert who is helping them do the writing. Maybe over time, then they will learn and be able to take over. But then I would say definitely at the beginning, they need that support and expertise. And that's what we actually in BCW, we spend quite a bit of time working on.
Thank you very much. As we are done with this 1 hour that we all agreed to devote to this discussion, I think it's time to wrap up. Although I'm quite sure we could have taken another hour, and still there would be questions unanswered. But this actually shows how dynamic this space is. How dynamic is the challenge also of addressing social media platform strategies, of designing the right strategies, and how open-minded one has to be if you want to be successful. You have to always be open to learning, to observing, and I hope that this webinar provided some valuable perspectives to our audience on how to approach policy communications in social media platforms, as they're very dynamically shifting this year, and it will probably give us more shifts next year, with maybe threats being available in Europe, with LinkedIn maybe becoming more and more important, with maybe more stakeholders from the institutions joining LinkedIn. We'll see about that. So a very interesting space, and I would like to continue this discussion. The EU Bubble Insider is always a place that welcomes discussions like this, that are helpful for professionals working in the EU Bubble industry. Maria, Roisin, and Jacques, thank you very much for your time and all the valuable insights and expertise that you shared with us today.
Thank you. Thanks, Christoph. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
And thank you, everyone, for watching. Goodbye.